If you know anything about the Jack the Ripper murders, you've definitely heard of George Lusk and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee. Formed at the height of the Whitechapel murders, the committee was a group of East End businessmen openly critical of the lack of police progress in relation to the murders. They wanted real action, and they even arranged their own nightly patrol groups. So who was George Lusk? Who made up the committee? And what impact did their investigations have on the case? Let's have a look. Some people have pointed to Lusk as a suspect. I don't think he's ever been a formal or legitimate suspect. This may well just stem from confusion. His name is linked to the case and they've assigned it incorrectly to the suspect list somehow. George Aiken Lusk was born in 1839 to John, a solicitor's clerk, and Margaret Lusk in Stepney, London. In 1863 he married Susanna Price in Stepney, and the couple would go on to have 7 children. George was a builder and decorator, and he specialised in restoring music halls. So he made a decent living for himself and his family. And he also had his finger in a lot of pies around London. He was the church warden for his church, and he was a member of the Freemasons of the Doric Lodge until 1889. As you know, the Whitechapel murders began in April 1888 with Emma Elizabeth Smith, followed in August the same year by Martha Tabram. Although it's now generally accepted that Jack the Ripper killed 5 women, the canonical victims, between August and November 1888, at the time of the murders there was no such distinction, and the murders were all included just within the group of the Whitechapel murders. And some people do still consider that some of the Whitechapel murder victims were killed by Jack the Ripper. The reason I mention this is because although Polly Nichols is typically referred to as the first victim of Jack the Ripper, when she was murdered on the 31st of August 1888, she was the 3rd woman to be brutally murdered in the East End of London, and her death caused widespread panic. People were horrified, and many thought that the police weren't doing enough. When Annie Chapman was found brutally murdered on the 8th of September 1888, enough was enough. A meeting was held in the Crown Pub on the 10th of September 1888, and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee was formed, made up of 16 businessmen and tradesmen from around Whitechapel and Spitalfields. And they believed that as well as being generally ineffective in failing to provide adequate protection or capture the killer, the murders were also affecting the local businesses. And I don't know how exactly this was affecting the businesses. Perhaps people were avoiding the area. I think I would have. At this initial meeting, the members voted George Lusk as the chairman. And to give you an idea of the other types of businessmen involved, there was a cigar manufacturer, a tailor, a picture frame maker, a licensed victualler, and an actor. They were essentially a sort of vigilante group. They met every evening at 9 o'clock in the Crown Pub. They hired and provided a small wage to local unemployed men to patrol the streets of Spitalfields and Whitechapel in coordinated beats. Each man was provided with a pair of galoshes, a strong stick, and a police whistle, and they walked their individual beats, much like the police, every night from midnight to around 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, looking for suspicious activity. I don't think they were sanctioned by the police, but they considered themselves to be a watch in addition to the police, supplementing the existing police beats. And when the pubs closed at 12:30, the committee meetings ended, and the members would then join the patrols. George Lusk was particularly critical of the Metropolitan Borough Police, openly so. He was a man of action, and he really did a lot to try and get others involved, with the aim of capturing and therefore stopping the killer. The Vigilance Committee posted hundreds of posters appealing for information about the Whitechapel murders, which contained Lusk's information as a contact point, and these were posted all around the East End. Lusk and Aarons wrote an open letter to the Home Secretary, Henry Matthews, appealing for a substantial reward to be offered by the government for information about the murders which he believed would convince the residents of the East End that the government were as concerned about the murders as they were. Unfortunately, though, this was refused on the basis of government policy, which banned financial rewards leading to the capture of criminals. Additionally, the police believed that if a reward was offered, they would receive so many false leads that it would impede their investigation. But Lusk and the Vigilance Committee didn't give up. They raised their own reward. They also hired 2 private detectives, a Mr. Batchelor and a Mr. Legrand, to investigate the murders independently of the police. Unfortunately, though, it doesn't appear that anything came of this. So there's no doubt that George Lusk and the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee really did a lot as far as the murders go. They really tried to help. It's annoying, isn't it, when people just sit back and moan and don't do anything to help. But George Lusk didn't do that. He put his money where his mouth was. And I think that he and the other committee members should be applauded for that. Due to his outspoken nature, his tenacity, George Lusk's name often appeared in the papers, national as well as local. His name was well known at the time, and because of this, he received some odd communication. Some were undoubtedly hoaxes, but some were more sinister, threatening letters claiming to be from Jack the Ripper. On Thursday the 4th of October 1888, a man visited George Lusk's home. He was described as being 5 foot 9 inches tall, between the ages of 30 and 40, with a bushy brown beard, whiskers and a moustache. The man asked to speak to Lusk, but he was told that he wasn't home. He was visiting a local pub. Well, the man went to the pub where he found Lusk as promised. He approached Lusk and struck up a conversation with him, soon steering that conversation to the Vigilance Committee, in particular the beats that the patrolman took, pressing him for details on these. He then asked Lusk to accompany him to a private room. Well, apparently Lusk didn't like the look of him. He declined, though he did continue speaking to him in the main room. And it was an odd kind of exchange, Lusk would later say. The man at one point pulled a pencil from his pocket, dropped it on the floor, on purpose, Lusk believed, and told him to pick it up. Well, Lusk went to pick it up, but out the corner of his eye, he saw the man quickly move his hand towards a pocket. Maybe it was a bit of a test, but Lusk didn't react, and then asked Lusk where the nearest coffee house was. Lusk gave him directions to a nearby coffee house on Mile End Road, and the man left. That's just odd behaviour, isn't it? George Lusk thought so too, and he decided to follow the man. However, between the pub and the coffee house, Lusk lost him. But he continued to the coffee house, asking about the man when he arrived, only to be told that the man had never been there. A few days later, on the 10th of October, Lusk began to notice a man lurking around his house at number 1 Alderney Road, watching he and his family. Lusk reported this man to the police, complete with a full description, and this was circulated throughout the police force. 2 days later, on the 12th of October, Lusk received a letter through the post. It read,
I write you a letter in black ink, as I have no more of the right stuff. I think you are all asleep in Scotland Yard with your bloodhounds, as I will show you tomorrow night, Saturday. I am going to do a double event, but not in Whitechapel. Got rather too warm there, had to shift. No more till you hear me again, Jack the Ripper.
This seems taunting rather than threatening to me, but I'm sure it would be extremely unsettling to receive. And if that wasn't bad enough, it was followed by another, this time a postcard on the 14th of October, which read,
Say boss, you seem rare frightened. Guess I'd like to give you fits, but can't stop time enough to let your box of toys play copper games with me. But hope to see you when I don't hurry much. Bye bye, boss.
So do you think the frightened reference refers to the man that had been lurking around outside? Because Lusk reported him to the police, which does send signals of worry, doesn't it? I think this may be more of a veiled threat. I'm still watching you. It also seems to me that the author is referencing the Vigilance Committee when he speaks of playing copper games. On the 15th of October 1888, a young woman named Emily Marsh, working in her father's leather shop on Jubilee Street, said that a man came in dressed in cleric's clothing, asking about the Whitechapel Vigilance Committee reward poster hanging in the shop window, and where he might find the chairman of the committee, George Lusk. She said that the man was unsettling, and she directed him to the Crown pub where somebody there would be able to provide him with Lusk's address. However, the man said he didn't wish to go to a pub. Perhaps she wanted to help this man, maybe thinking that he had some information about the perpetrator. But more likely, she wanted to get rid of this unsettling man, and she quickly found an old newspaper which had an article inside containing the street name of Lusk's address, but not the house number. Well, Emily Marsh said that he wrote this down in a pocketbook and quickly left. And she would later give a description of this man as being about 6 foot tall, of slim build, about 45 years of age, with a sallow complexion, a dark beard and moustache. And she also said that he'd had an Irish accent. So George Lusk had now had threats, a stalker, strangers asking after him and acting suspicious around him. And I think it's normal for people in the spotlight to attract sometimes the wrong kind of attention. Extra patrols, alongside those of the police, would have made it difficult for the killer, who killed and mutilated women out in the open. There may well have been animosity from Jack the Ripper towards the Vigilance Committee. If he had anything to do with these incidents or threats, perhaps it was with the intention of getting George Lusk to back off. Then, on the 16th of October 1888, George Lusk received a small box, an accompanying letter, through the post. This small box contained half a kidney that had begun to smell, and the accompanying letter, with a return address from hell, read,
Mr. Lusk, saw. I sent you half the kidney I took from one woman, preserved it for you. To the piece I fried and ate, it was very nice. I may send you the bloody knife that took it out if only you wait a while longer. Signed, Catch me when you can, Mr. Lusk.
Well, I don't know about you, but if I received something like that in the post, I'd be absolutely petrified. Could the cleric in the shop have been the same man that sent the mystery parcel? Well, the timings match. It was postmarked the day before. He could easily have gotten Lusk's house number after getting the address from Miss Marsh in the shop. If he was, it's unlikely that he was the person that was seen lurking about Lusk's home or had sent the previous 2 letters, who clearly knew his address. Initially, George Lusk put this down to a practical joke and put it in his desk drawer. He may not have had the knowledge to have recognised this as a kidney, let alone a human kidney. If he had, I'm sure he would have taken it more seriously. This package had been postmarked the 15th of October 1888, 11 days after the inquest, and this inquest would have been open to the public, including the press, and so it would have been no secret that Catherine's left kidney had been missing. And although it would have been possible for some members of society to obtain a human kidney, for example, doctors or maybe medical students, this probably wouldn't have been the case for most of the population. George Lusk may have been right, it may have been a hoax, but to hold on to this potential evidence, I think, was extremely unfair. He'd been so critical about the lack of effective policing, and here he was holding on to evidence. Even if it was a hoax, Lusk really wasn't the right person to determine this, and in my mind, I think he should have passed it straight to the police. Whether they were linked to Jack the Ripper or not, and whether the kidney was human or not, there was every possibility that it could have been. It was illegal to obtain human body parts, let alone to send them through the post as a threat. A crime had been committed, and it makes me wonder if there had been any other evidence that came into the hands of George Lusk or the Whitechapel Committee that never was forwarded to the police, and whether that would have been a detriment to the investigation. That being said, it's easy in hindsight to criticise somebody for their actions. And like I said earlier, he really is to be commended. And I could be completely wrong, but he doesn't strike me as the type of person that would want to obstruct a police investigation. Policing itself was different back then, and people were unlikely aware of the importance of evidence to the extent that we are today. I also wonder if Lusk was concerned that if he had reported this to the police, they might advise him, tell him, he and the Vigilance Committee, to stop the patrols, particularly given the other threats and the stalkers. And to Lusk, this would mean less protection and less chance to find the murderer. And after all, he believed that the police weren't doing enough. Perhaps he thought there was no investigation to compromise. And I wouldn't be surprised that with everything that was going on in his life, that he might have been under severe stress and he may not have been thinking clearly. In some ways desensitised to the negative attention he was receiving. Although he thought that the letter and the package were a hoax, He did bring them up at the committee meeting the following night. The other committee members felt it should be taken more seriously, and a few of them went to Lusk's house to inspect the packet and the letter. Lusk wanted to get rid of it, but they persuaded him to have the kidney examined and to take it to a nearby doctor, Dr. Frederick Wiles on Mile End Road. So what did the examination of the kidney show? Well, the men took the kidney to Dr. Wiles, but he wasn't there. His assistant, Mr. Reed, examined the kidney and took it to Dr. Thomas Horrocks Openshaw at the London Hospital, who was of the opinion that the kidney came from an alcoholic woman who had died in the last 3 weeks, and that the person it was taken from had suffered from Bright's disease. However, this was debated at the time, and Dr. Openshaw would later dispute this, saying that there was no way to tell whether the kidney came from a man or a woman. But the kidney was human, and it was a left kidney, and it was the left kidney that had been taken from Catherine Eddowes. The kidney was eventually handed over to the City of London Police. Remember, Catherine was killed in Mitre Square, which is under the jurisdiction of the City of London Police rather than the Metropolitan Borough Police. And what about the letter? Well, this is referred to as the From Hell letter, and this too has been analysed. It's considered that the level of literacy is much lower than that contained in the other Jack the Ripper letters, and it contains many spelling and grammatical errors. Experts can't agree, though, on whether this is deliberate or not, because there are some silent letters that are included which you would expect to be missing, such as H in while, and K in knife have been included, but a much simpler word has been misspelled. For example, the Y on the end of kidney. The writing style is cramped and the page is messy, with ink spots, as though the writer was inexperienced with using pen and ink. A forensic handwriting expert, Michelle Dresbold, believes that the letter is genuine, and this is because of the peculiar characteristics of the handwriting, in particular the Y's. Linguistic clues such as the misspelling of preserved instead of preserved points to the writer possibly being Irish, and that he may have had Cockney mannerisms, pointing to a working class or lower middle class Londoner. And many agree with her, believing that the letter is genuine, sent by Jack the Ripper, him or herself. Personally, I'm torn with the kidney. I think that's partly because it's difficult for me to get my head around anybody wanting to do something like that as a joke. I know it was another time, but even then I can't see that it would have been that much different. It was a human kidney, a part of somebody's body, and it just seems very disrespectful. It's like anybody who would have done something like that would have been warped or criminally minded in some way. Well, whether real or a hoax, the letter is one of the most well-known pieces of correspondence concerning the case, and it's inspired, amongst other things, a graphic novel and a film. On the 20th of October 1888, George Lusk had apparently had enough. He resigned as chairman of the Vigilance Committee, and there was a report of this in Lloyd's Weekly on the 21st of October, which read, "Yesterday, Mr. G. Lusk, the chairman of the Vigilance Committee, constituted to assist in the discovery of the murder of the unfortunates in East London, sent in his resignation assigning the reason the need for absolute rest, which he felt to be necessary after the worry and anxiety and horror he had experienced during the past few days. The Treasurer and Secretary have also announced their intention of resigning on account of the lack of moral and material support they have experienced during their philanthropic efforts to benefit their fellow citizens." It may be that Lusk didn't take the kidney as a joke, as he'd first said. He'd been targeted regardless, whether by Jack the Ripper himself or in his name. I have to say I don't blame him, and it really is very sad, given everything that he tried to do. George Lusk died on the 25th of October 1919 at the age of 80. A good age back then. In the next video we'll be talking about the mysterious Mary Jane Kelly, the fifth and final canonical victim of Jack the Ripper, and the only victim to be murdered in her own home. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you then.